Hello and welcome to Brass Tacks Talking Cybersecurity, brought to you by Fortinet. I'm your host, Joe Robertson, and cybersecurity is exactly what this show is about. But we don't focus on technology. What we're looking at is the business implications of cybersecurity for decision makers, executives, and board members. Really anyone whose roles could be impacted by cyber attacks, which nowadays means just about everyone, doesn't it? As for me, I'm an executive consultant helping top managers navigate the intersection between business needs and security requirements. Now, we call the program Brass Tacks because the expression getting down to brass tacks means getting to the core of a subject, the important points. So let's get down to brass tacks. Today's guest is Ricardo Ferreira, European Field CISO at Fortinet. Ricardo, welcome to Brass Tacks. Let's talk cybersecurity.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you are the European Field Chief Information Security Officer at Fortinet, and you deal on a regular basis, I suppose, with executives and with technical people. We can say that almost everyone has heard about ransomware and computer viruses and things like that. But you really are seeing a lot of very sophisticated attacks that people may not be aware of. Can you tell us about some of them?
Definitely, Joe. So I think cybersecurity these days is a number one concern. It made the round of the boards because now more executives are concerned with cybersecurity, how they can secure their own organization. But the threat landscape, those threats are evolving, as with everything. And what we have been seeing is the supply chain issues, meaning that the third parties that actually form a piece of some software are causing issues. And one big event that actually happened and had big repercussions was SolarWinds in 2021. So for those of you who don't know, SolarWinds is a piece of software that actually manages networks equipments, and somehow a malicious piece of software was introduced in there and caused massive mayhem. But more recently, what we've seen was this one of the most advanced attacks in my career in 20 years, which was also a supply chain issue on an open source. And this was very advanced because it took several years to unfold.
Several years. So how did that happen? Explain to us how several years of time were elapsed and generated a security threat. What was that?
So if you look at the timeline, you can see that the bad actors actually created an account in 2021. And then they started to build up the reputation and the confidence with the open source maintainers in order to write software and it to get approved. And it was just this year that it was actually discovered, that issue. So if you look at from the composition perspective, it had a technical angle because that bad actor had to know what he was doing because it wasn't easy, how he was masking and making sure that everything was hidden. The second was the psychological aspect because one of the maintainers was also being pressured by other accounts to give out more control to this new person.
And those other accounts weren't necessarily good actors either, were they?
No. And the third aspect is what we started, which is the time. It was not time-bound. So it was someone who actually understood this vulnerability, which is in the compression. So in the internet, we need to compress things. And what happened was that the way that they hid was when it was being assembled, this piece of software, it would trigger something and it would cause an issue on SSH. For those of you who don't know, it's like a program that allows you to remote access every computer. So it means that almost the majority, 80-90% of devices use SSH, so that would be exposed.
So you're talking about open source software that they tried to attack it. Can you explain to us what open source software is and where this would have been visible to normal people who aren't technical?
So when organizations are trying to do something, obviously they're not going to reinvent the wheels like Lego blocks. They are going to put the Lego blocks one on top of the other. And this is the same with open source software. Everybody can use those Lego blocks. And sometimes you pick up those pieces and you start assembling. But the issue is that you really don't understand how that block was assembled or what is the plastic behind that block, right? And that was the issue, was that this open source project means that everybody can contribute. It's open, right? In this case, it only had one maintainer. The maintainer was saying that he had some health issues. And this is where those bad actors jumped on it and say, oh, let me take care of it. But they knew how that piece of software integrated with the rest of the ecosystem, because that was their main goal. In order to disrupt the rest, they knew that the rest of the ecosystem was using that little piece that nobody was looking at.
So they took one little block that was used in lots of places. I assume it's things like web servers and things like that, and put special code in it, and that was backdoor code, right? That would let them have access to any of those servers that they wanted.
Yes, Joe. So in cybersecurity, there's this thing called RCE, remote code execution, but that's the holy grail. So when we're developing offensive tools, the holy grail, what we are trying to achieve is remote code execution, meaning that you don't need to interact with the device. It gets hacked without you doing anything. There's other means where you need to visit a website or you need to click on something, but in this case was remote code execution, which the user doesn't need to do anything. It's the holy grail.
Okay, now what we're talking about here was what's called a supply chain attack. Now, when I think of a supply chain, a lot of us think of the production supply chain of having raw materials, etc. But we're in a digital age now, and there's also a software supply chain, a digital supply chain, and that's what we're talking about. These pieces of software that are sold or used by organizations around the world. And for an attacker, if he's able to put bad software into those pieces of those applications, he can have access not to one target, one victim, but potentially hundreds or thousands.
Yeah, Joe, and I think the analogy is the same, and I think we can play a bit with, if we are trying to make a bread, there's going to be flour, there's going to be salt, there's going to be water, right? And what happens if the flour is contaminated? I don't think the bread is going to be good.
No.
Right?
And it's not because the water was contaminated, it's because the flour, and so you got a problem in your supply chain.
Exactly. But from a supply chain perspective, this is, like you said, a challenge, not just in raw materials, but also in software, right? And if you look also at what is happening from a regulation perspective and from an importance, everybody's trying to focus on the security of supply chain and making sure that the risk of those items that make part of it are addressed.
That brings up a question in my mind, and that is when we talk about software that is being used by organizations that they bring in, third-party software, it makes me think of one of the hot items of today, which is AI, artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, which is being produced and is the hot subject. That's got to have an implication in this supply chain, because the supply chain, the companies that are providing the generative AI are third parties in almost every case. What is the impact of AI in this environment?
Not for AI per se, but the data, because garbage in, garbage out. If you look at what AI requires in order to work, data is at the core, right? And if you also look, going back to what we were saying on how the governments are trying to address this issue, for example, with DORA and NIS regulations in order to address critical entities, but also there's the AI Act from Europe, which is also puts a special focus on AI and its supply chain, meaning the data from that. But personally, I feel that there's a big hype around AI. I feel that the return of investment for generative AI isn't there quite yet. Obviously, there's things like support, generation of code, customer experience that are going to be completely changed by GenAI. But I just feel that from a business perspective, the value isn't there yet. But that doesn't mean that organizations should not be already putting their foot in the door and trying to build the skill set within their organization or within their products. For example, Bloomberg, right? The majority of the traders, they will use it. They develop their own Bloomberg GTP, which you can ask questions. Hey, tell me about this stock. Hey, tell me about the dividends or whatever it is. Any financial question that you have, you can ask that. Or in case of Fortinet, we also have the Forti AI, which can actually help security teams that use FortiCM or FortiSOAR in order to do questions and natural language to that data set. The first building blocks are there and organizations are using.
Okay, but when I think about generative AI and the companies that are providing it, most companies aren't creating their whole environment themselves. They're basing it on Google or ChatGPT or something like that. That's a third party. That's going to be part of your supply chain. How worried should we be about those third-party generative AI organizations, Google, ChatGPT, whomever, actually being attacked as well and us not knowing about it?
That's a great question, Joe. I don't have the answer to that. What I know is that if you're trying to build a model, obviously you're going to build the model by yourself. But the issue and the elephant in the room is that, do you know that, for example, OpenAI or Google with the Gemini actually spend more than $100 million in order to train their models? So that makes elevates the barrier to entry quite a bit. But still, I feel that those generative AI models can be attacked, right? And I think it's up to the organizations and also to those hyperscalers to make sure that they communicate the risk in a clear manner so that everybody understands what they are getting into.
So what are the kinds of risks that we could imagine if I am a company and I want to start using generative AI, even if I'm just putting my toe in the water and testing it, what are the kinds of things that I need to worry about?
Okay, let's just break it into three big topics. I think the first one would be the availability. The second one, the integrity of the system. And the third one, the privacy. By availability, for example, if there's data poisoning, meaning that you taint that data, the model's going to spew another type of data, another type of output, another answer that is not what you intended to. Or in the case of doing denial of service, but in a way that you cause that model to increase the cost for the organizations.
So instead of giving you a good answer, it gives you a bad answer, which you may not realize is bad, which is going to cost your organization.
Or you just give him garbage and the model just keeps on spinning the wheels, consuming resources without being able to give you an answer. That's an attack on availability. Or on the privacy aspect, you can actually extract data that you shouldn't be extracting from those models. And that has happened already.
Okay, so if I have an organization that is looking at generative AI, what are the kinds of activities that I should be making sure that the security team is doing or the development team is doing to make sure that they've got security happening?
Going back to our big buzzword about DevOps, I don't know if you know the DevSecOps, right?
Okay, let's explain what these things are. DevOps is
development and operations together in a more agile way.
So it means creating software in small pieces quickly and putting it in place quickly and making sure that it works. It's the whole idea behind break it quickly and fix it quickly.
Exactly. And then DevSecOps appeared because security wasn't taken seriously. And if you look at these new models nowadays, there's MLOps, machine learning operations, and LLM ops, large language models operations,
okay.
Right? So I feel that security should be underpinning all of those agility frameworks that organizations are using. There should be, for example, red teaming. There should be data lineage. I think data lineage for me is the key one.
Okay, explain these things. Explain red team and data lineage.
Okay, let's start for the data lineage. Data lineage means that as I'm consuming data, the data is going to be modified, it's going to be consumed in one part, it's going to be, again, modified, it's going to be consumed, modified in another part. And it's making sure that you track all the journey of the data and you know how it was altered by whom. That's what means data lineage.
So in a sense, if I'm a store tracking what someone is buying, I note that he's bought canned goods here and he bought milk there, and then a few days later he bought cereal. And if we have bad data lineage, someone could pretend that he bought something else or take one of those out, and my data now is polluted.
Yes, and data lineage protects against that because it allows you to understand where that data has been and how it was modified. And for an AI system, that's key because data is at the core of everything. So making sure that you track your data, how it flows across your organization is going to be key for any executive dealing with cybersecurity in generative AI. Now, to your question, to the other question about red teaming, think about external hackers, but internal hackers working for you, trying to break whatever it is, but then fixing it as well.
Okay, so attacking yourself before the bad guys attack you.
Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. When we think about these aspects of generative AI, there's an awful lot of potential, okay? But I know that one of the questions that I've got about it is, what don't we know? What dirty little secrets are there about generative AI that people aren't talking about despite all the hype? Fill us in.
I think we already discussed, Joe. I feel that personally, GenAI is not going to be the silver bullet. Obviously, it's going to be big, transformational. There's going to be a lot of organizations trying to jump on the bandwagon, but we need to be pragmatic about it. The business value should be there, without a question, right? In this current economic climate, there's a bit of talking about consolidation on everything. So I think we should also be focused on the time of the AI that we are using, the generative AI that we are using, and how we are using, and underpinned by a business case. And finally, making sure that the security controls are there and they are mitigating whatever threats they are, either from a Gen AI or from other systems. Because in most cases, Joe, things simple as inventorization aren't there yet.
Inventory. So having an inventory of just the software?
For example, there's this thing called SBOMs, software bills of materials, which is also key on how you make sure that you understand how that software was built and what are the different parts.
Okay, so if we take a step back, because we've had a lot of semi-technical things that we've been talking about here, and for an audience that is intelligent but not necessarily technically savvy, I guess we could summarize it by saying that the supply chain attacks are real, and you have to make sure your security team is paying attention to every piece of software that you buy externally and has done some sort of vetting of the software or some kind of way of certifying that there is hopefully no hidden attack software in it, and that AI has a lot of hype behind it. But from what I hear you saying, you really need to treat your generative AI project, even if it's just a pilot project, like any other software project, and security needs to be built into it from the very beginning.
Agree, Joe. And I think that's one of the issues that I don't see happening because it's a very fast moving ecosystem, the generative AI. And if you look at all the frameworks, all the best practices, they put cybersecurity on the back burner. For example, I'm part of a working group for AI risk and technology, and we are crafting a white paper that actually talks about the threat taxonomies, on how you can actually apply a RACI matrix in order to support those controls. But like I said, it's very new. So to answer your question, I feel that organizations should be looking at this emerging technology and also applying emerging cybersecurity methods to it as well.
Okay, so we're in the early stages of generative AI, and we're also in the early stages of the security aspects of Gen AI.
Yes.
Okay, well, a lot to think about, a lot to absorb there, Ricardo. Really appreciate the time you spent with us. The clarifications have been quite interesting, rather sobering as well. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ricardo. It's been great talking to you for Brass Tacks. And that's it for today's Brass Tacks with Ricardo Ferreira, Field CISO at Fortinet. Now, I hope you found it interesting and useful. I know that I did. I learned an awful lot today. Please join us again for another episode of Brass Tacks Talking Cybersecurity, brought to you by Fortinet. This series is available both as an audio and a video podcast. You will find it on your regular podcast app or YouTube, as well as on Fortinet TV.